I'm lying in a pile of broken concrete, my entire right side completely immobile. Honestly, if you could see what's in front of me right now, you'd swear you were watching some monster movie. But the thing is, this is a wind tunnel lab 50 meters underground, and that creature, the one that just bit off a chunk of a heavy reinforced concrete base like it was a cookie, is standing right in front of me, alive and real. My left ear is ringing nonstop, this piercing screech that's pounding in my skull. I touched it, and my hand came away sticky with blood, warm and dripping down my neck into my clothes. Less than 3 meters ahead of me, the massive base that used to anchor hypersonic aircraft is completely wrecked. That concrete block, as big as 2 trucks, now has a huge chunk missing, and the broken edge is covered in dents bite marks. The wind tunnel duct is totally deformed. The air inside is raging wildly, slamming into the twisted steel plates with a deafening roar, like 2 fully loaded trains crashing head-on into a wall. The sound makes my chest feel tight. Through all this chaos of dust, a giant black shadow is lumbering forward. It's so tall it nearly scrapes the ceiling. Its entire body is encased in a shiny black shell, and it's pushing through the gale force wind, strong enough to shred a person to pulp, step by step, heading straight for me. Its feet are incredibly heavy. 2 legs like massive pillars, no toes, just flat, hard blocks. Every time it takes a step, the alloy floor lets out a harsh, muffled groan and caves into a deep pit. The surrounding steel plates can't handle the weight, and rivets start popping out with sharp snaps. Those flying rivets zip through the air at insane speeds, hitting the walls and sparking like a machine gun firing. Suddenly, a rivet whizzes past my ear. I feel a cool breeze graze my scalp, and then the blast wall behind me lets out a loud thud, punched through with a finger-size hole, showering my head with concrete dust. The big black thing takes another step forward. Its shell trembles slightly in the wind, making a sound like scraping metal. It has no eyes, no nose, just a long slit on its face. That slit starts fluttering open and shut incredibly fast. As it does, I can see rows of gleaming white spikes inside, like machine parts. It's sniffing the air, or maybe listening to my heavy breathing. I clamp my hand over my mouth, pressing myself deeper into the concrete rubble. The ground shakes more violently, and big chunks of insulation and ceiling debris rain down on my blast helmet. The black-shelled monster stops. From its slit-like mouth, shiny, mercury-like liquid starts dripping. Those drops hit the hot alloy floor, sending up pungent white smoke. It's getting closer. Rewind 20 minutes. Our squad was on standby upstairs. Suddenly, we got a direct order. Gear up fully and hold the line at the classified wind tunnel lab 50 meters underground. That place is built deep in the earth, so secure, not even a fly gets in normally. We took the elevator down. As soon as we entered the lab hall, the test was just starting. The massive machine let out a low rumble. Red lights on the control panel started flashing wildly, so bright they hurt my eyes. Standing behind the reinforced blast glass, I saw a huge hypersonic aircraft model inside the test duct. The numbers on the big screen were climbing frantically, with wind speed already hitting Mach 5. Wind that fast. If it hit an ordinary person, it would blow them to nothing in an instant. We were about to sling our rifles when a strange vibration came up through the concrete floor beneath us. It was powerful, making the soles of my feet tingle. This was nothing like the machine's vibration. That was steady, a constant hum. But this underground tremor was erratic, surging and fading without pattern. It sounded like some impossibly heavy monster was digging at our lab's foundation with a supersized shovel weighing hundreds of tons. The captain frowned and told us to stay alert. Then, the big speaker on the control panel let out a piercing shriek, and the Mach 5 warning alarm went dead. In the next second, the green lines on the monitor showing duct pressure all turned to glaring blood red within a second. Those lines were shaking like crazy. The captain pulled the bolt, waved us forward, and pushed open the heavy airlock door. We raised our rifles and filed into the outer corridor of the observation room. As soon as we stepped inside, a strange, foul odor hit us. It smelled like dead fish left out for days, mixed with a thick, burnt motor oil scent. The lights in the corridor began to flicker, and the green safety indicators blinked on and off. We moved along the corridor. Soon, everyone stopped. Old Lay pointed to a thick steel pipe used to pressurize the wind tunnel. The pipe was massive, made of 3-centimeter thick special steel. But now, rows of clear impressions covered its surface. Those impressions were huge, as big as a household basin, deep, sunken bite marks. Something unknown had bitten straight into the thick steel, compressing it inward by a large chunk. A slimy, stringy, transparent liquid clung to the pipe's surface. Old Lay swallowed hard and bravely reached out to touch the bite mark. Just as his fingertips were about to touch the pipe, the entire wind tunnel, hundreds of meters long, shook violently. The sound was like a thunderclap right in our ears. The thick white insulation wrapped around the pipe began to fall off in sheets, covering the ground with white dust. Once the insulation fell away, the dark steel shell underneath was exposed. We clearly saw bulges pushing outward from inside the pipe, as if some living monster trapped within was slamming its body against the steel plate again and again. The plate boomed with each impact, and screws flew out one by one. Inside that pipe, a terrifying wind of Mach 5 was raging. How could anything survive in that, let alone pound the walls? The thing pressing against the steel plate moved too fast for me to reach out and pull Old Lay back. With a deafening roar, the 3-centimeter thick reinforced steel plate tore open like paper, ripped apart into a massive gap. An incredibly thick limb, covered in shiny black shell, shot out from the breach. It carried immense force, moving like a cannonball, just fired and slammed straight into Old Lay, who was standing at the front. Old Lay didn't make a sound. The heavy, pitch-black limb flattened him and smashed him into the concrete wall behind. The entire wall collapsed instantly, with countless chunks of concrete and sand pouring down, burying most of his body. I could see his helmet was completely crushed, flat as a pancake, and the white insulation on the ground was stained red in a large patch. The captain screamed for us to open fire, his voice piercing in the narrow corridor. I reflexively raised my heavy machine gun and held down the trigger. A stream of heavy machine gun bullets, trailing long tongues of fire, pounded into the shell-covered limb. But the sound of the gunfire was strange. The bullets hit it without a single spark. Normally, bullets striking steel make a crisp clang, but now, hitting this monster shell, the sound was dull and muffled like a rusty blunt knife hacking at thick, rotten old leather. The immense kinetic energy of the bullets vanished the moment they touched the black shell. I watched closely. The bullets flattened into discs as soon as they hit the slime on its shell. They clattered down along the monster's hard shell, falling onto the marble floor like a hailstorm of iron. The monster didn't seem to feel any pain. It didn't even flinch. Just then, the breach grew larger. The shell-covered monster forced its entire body through the gap in the steel plate. Its body was so wide that it pushed the steel plates outward on both sides. Metal scraped against metal with a grating, teeth-grinding sound that made my ears ache and my skin crawl. The super hurricane inside the wind tunnel now rushed out through the breach. That was a Mach 5 wind, strong enough to strip flesh from bone. The gale sent iron stools, waste paper, and toolboxes flying through the air. The wind slammed into the monster's black shell, causing the composite armor plates to vibrate loudly, producing a heavy roar like a floodgate about to burst. But the monster didn't even wobble. It stood rock steady in that fierce wind, like a steel pillar driven deep into the ground. It raised an arm made of countless thick, twisted meat tubes, writhing wildly beneath a glossy black shell, as if hundreds of snakes were burrowing through them. It thrust that bizarre arm forward, and 5 fingers like massive steel hooks dug straight into a 2-ton steel control cabinet. That cabinet was bolted firmly to a concrete foundation with several large screws, but the monster just gave a casual yank. With a series of snapping sounds as the steel bars broke, it ripped the entire huge cabinet out of the ground with one hand. It swung its arm, whipping the rectangular iron cabinet in a half circle through the air, then hurled it straight at us, right where we were. "Dot!" Xiao Chong shouted, scrambling and rolling into a small alcove nearby. I flattened myself on the ground, clutching my head with both hands. That massive control cabinet flew past, grazing my helmet, and the wind it kicked up stung my face. Then, with a deafening crash, it slammed into our sheet metal barricade. With a sharp crack, the thick iron plates we used to block bullets instantly caved in. Shattered metal shards and countless small parts sprayed out like buckshot in every direction. Old Du was crouched behind the barricade, reloading his magazine, and had no time to run. After the cabinet smashed through the barrier, the remaining force crushed down on Old Du's right leg. He let out a scream so agonizing it didn't sound human. The pant leg on his right leg was instantly flattened, and beneath the iron cabinet, white, splintered bone fragments were exposed. "My leg! I can't get my leg out!" Old Du clawed at the steel floor with both hands, his fingernails bending backward, leaving 5 long bloody streaks on the ground. After tossing the cabinet, the monster took another ponderous step forward. With each step, shiny mucus oozed from the gaps in its black shell, dripping onto wind-torn wires and triggering a series of crackling blue sparks. Its rectangular, airlock-like mouth flapped faster and faster, the metal firing pins inside clattering together with a dense, rhythmic noise like a factory loom. The captain, while frantically firing at the monster's face, reached out with his left hand to pull the cabinet off Old Du's leg. But it was too heavy, with twisted steel bars caught on it. The captain's face turned red from strain, veins bulging on his forehead, and he could only lift the iron cabinet a tiny bit. The monster's black shell body had now fully entered the center of the passage, blocking most of our escape route behind us. The fierce wind in the wind tunnel kept howling, whipping up white dust and shredded paper everywhere. In this underground corridor, filled with machine wreckage and grating noise, that massive, featureless black shadow slowly turned its rectangular head toward us. After smashing the control cabinet, the big, shell-covered creature suddenly stopped all movement. Its 2 heavy legs, covered in thick meat tubes, stood rooted in place, no longer advancing toward us. Xiao Chong and I lay flat behind the rubble, barely daring to breathe. The captain wiped the cold sweat from his face with his hand, his rifle still trained unwaveringly on the black monster. The monster slowly turned its featureless head toward the wind tunnel's intake nozzle. That spot was now blasting out high-pressure air with tens of thousands of horsepower, the roaring wind so loud it felt like it could burst eardrums. It tilted its head, listening for a moment, as if the massive noise there suited its taste. It began to move, crawling slowly toward the intake nozzle. It moved slowly, dragging its 2 thick, black-shelled arms along the ground, making an unpleasant scraping sound. When it reached the nozzle, it pressed its head, larger than an armored vehicle, firmly against the air-spewing opening. Strangely, the moment it pressed its head there, the gunfire that had been deafeningly loud suddenly stopped. The entire underground corridor fell silent, leaving only the dull hum of the main compressor holding its breath. That sound grew especially low, like a huge pot clamped tightly over a furnace. The crisis seemed to have passed for now. The captain pressed the walkie-talkie to his mouth and spoke to us in a low voice, his tone trembling badly. The captain told us that this thing might be a blind creature with no eyes, relying entirely on sound to locate us earlier. Now it's been drawn away by the deafening noise of the machinery. As long as we lie still, making no sound, and wait for the main compressor to shut down automatically due to overload, we can safely slip away. After hearing the captain's words, everyone breathed a slight sigh of relief. Xiao Qiang slowly leaned his body against the broken concrete corner behind him, began to eject the empty magazine from his arms, and replaced it with a new one. Old Du lay on the ground, clutching his crushed right leg tightly with his hands, gritting his teeth so hard they creaked, yet he didn't let out a single groan. I also gently placed the overheated heavy machine gun on the ground and reached up to wipe the blood streaming down my forehead. But as I looked around, I suddenly felt something strange about our surroundings. The howling wind inside the wind tunnel pipes was no longer audible, and logically, the air should have grown cooler. Yet now, I could feel the surrounding air growing hotter and hotter, even scorching to the skin. The iron pipes hanging on the walls began to seep tiny droplets of water on their surfaces. These droplets evaporated almost immediately upon forming, turning into wisps of white steam that drifted along the ceiling of the passage. Even stranger were the transparent slimes on the floor. When a monster had passed earlier, it left a large puddle of glistening fluid. Instead of solidifying, this fluid now seemed almost alive, slowly flowing along the seams of the alloy floor toward the control cables of the main compressor. Where the slime flowed, the paint on the steel plates began to bubble and blacken in large patches. I could hear a faint, sizzling sound like sulfuric acid corroding sheet metal. Not only that, the green safety indicator lights, which had been flickering earlier, were now completely extinguished. The entire passage was left with only the red alarm lights on the control panel, stuck in place and emitting an eerie red glow. The monster still had its large head pressed against the nozzle. The black shell on its body now pulsed rhythmically, the gaps opening wider than before. Lying on the ground, I watched those open gaps in its hard shell and noticed faint wisps of white smoke seeping out. The smoke carried an indescribable burnt smell, drifting toward us bit by bit along the heated air from the ground. Everything was too quiet, a silence so profound it felt deeply unsettling. The captain's earlier words now sounded like a colossal joke. The monster pressed against the wind tunnel intake nozzle wasn't sleeping, nor was it mesmerized by the machine's noise. Its two pillar-like legs were deeply embedded in the alloy steel plates of the floor, anchoring its entire body like a massive wedge, firmly lodged in the gap where air was being expelled. It was using its own body to completely block the wind tunnel's intake. The main compressor behind us was still spinning madly. That was a heavy-duty diesel compressor with tens of thousands of horsepower. Once activated, it would keep compressing air into this space unless shut down. Now, with the intake blocked by the black-shelled monster's head, the high-pressure airflow desperately surging forward had nowhere to go. It was all trapped inside the pipes, growing in volume and density. I saw the thickest main pipe overhead beginning to deform strangely. The once perfectly round steel pipe now looked as if it were being twisted by invisible hands, its surface developing long, distorted bulges. The reinforced concrete support columns surrounding the pipes, which held up the entire laboratory, began to groan under the strain. The surfaces of the meter-thick concrete columns started to crack and peel, revealing the thick, bent, and deformed steel reinforcements inside. Dense cracks, like spiderwebs, spread from the base of the columns all the way to the ceiling. Large chunks of concrete began to fall, splashing water on the floor everywhere. The specially designed large screws on the alloy ceiling, now subjected to unimaginable upward thrust from the pipes, began to pop out in rows. Each screw emitted a sharp, explosive crack as it flew out, the sound echoing violently through the passage. The ejected screws struck the nearby iron frames at high speed, denting them all over. The monster blocking the nozzle was now undergoing an utterly bizarre transformation. It had to withstand the immense back pressure from behind, 5 times the speed of sound, equivalent to tens of thousands of pounds of force. The black shells covering its body, subjected to extreme compression, began emitting sharp, cracking sounds. Yet, instead of shattering and falling off, the shells split open at their widest gaps, oozing a gleaming, mercury-like silver liquid. The moment this shimmering liquid made contact with the air, it instantly thickened, acting like glue to reseal the cracked black shells. Its muscles began to swell frantically. I could clearly see the thick, serpentine tubes coiled beneath its exoskeleton, each now expanding to the size of a car tire. These tubes writhed violently under the hard shell, stretching its body larger and thicker by the second. It opened its rectangular, slit-like mouth even wider, As its body expanded, it now completely filled the entire testing pipeline, dozens of meters wide, leaving not even the slightest gap. The faint whistling sound that had previously leaked through the pipeline seems vanished entirely. The entire underground laboratory had become a massive pressure cooker, packed with explosives and ready to blow at any moment. The indicator lights on the control panel had all gone dead. The pressure gauges had spun to their far right limits, jammed firmly into the red danger zones. The force was so immense that several of the needles had snapped in half right on their dials. Old dude beside me tried to stand up, but as he pushed himself halfway, a millstone-sized chunk of concrete crashed down from above. It struck the iron plate in front of him, flattening it completely against the ground. The impact sent old dude tumbling across the floor, his already broken leg dragging a long trail behind him. The temperature in the air was now terrifyingly high. With every breath, my throat felt as if it were on fire. My blast helmet's visor was fogged with a thick layer of condensation, forcing me to wipe it constantly just to barely make out the scene ahead. Suddenly, one of the monster's arms moved. Its muscles had swollen so drastically that parts of the black shell on its arm had burst open, revealing dark red tubes of flesh beneath. It swung its massive hand sideways, slamming directly into a thick, sparking high-voltage cable. The cable was as thick as a grown man's thigh, carrying an extremely high voltage. The moment the monster's hand made contact, a massive burst of blue electric sparks erupted, flooding the entire passage with blinding white light. A piercing, sizzling current surged continuously along its black shell, but the creature seemed like a giant insulator. The electricity left only black scorch marks on its shell, causing no real harm. Instead, it yanked the thick cable over, gripping it tightly with its 5 steel hook-like fingers. Under the immense force, the copper core inside the cable melted instantly, molten red copper dripping between its fingers and burning small, charred holes into the alloy floor. From its air vent-like mouth came its first sound. Not the roar of a beast, but a heavy, grinding rumble, like 2 massive rusted steel plates being forcibly pressed together under a hydraulic jack. At that moment, the captain pulled Xiao Chong aside, and the two of them pressed themselves tightly against the only remaining intact support column. The captain's rifle was out of ammo, and with trembling hands, he fumbled for the last magazine in his tactical vest. The violent tremors around them made his hands slip repeatedly, dropping the magazine to the floor. He scrambled on all fours to retrieve it. The alloy floor plates were now buckling upward across large sections. The pipes beneath the foundation, swollen from the high-pressure gas, were pushing up from below, warping the specially reinforced steel floor into rolling waves. Lying on the ground, I felt as if I were on a small boat caught in a storm, constantly tossed upward by the heaving floor only to crash back down on its shattered concrete. The creature covered in black shells pressed its head deeper. As the roar of the main compressor grew increasingly muffled, the air in the entire lab seemed to be sucked away. An unbearable pressure began to build in my ears, as if I were being stuffed into a vacuum bottle that was continuously being emptied of air. Even my eyeballs felt slightly bulged outward. The newly emerged crisis had shattered the illusion of a safe escape we had clung to moments earlier. Now, if the compressor behind us reached its limit and exploded, not a single intact bone would remain of us in this space 50 meters underground. Just as the last few large screws above our heads flew off, the auxiliary pipeline on the left finally gave out completely. A deafening roar, 10 times louder than before, echoed in my ears. Under the pressure of the high-pressure gas pushed to its limit, the pipeline split open lengthwise. Thick steel plates and chunks of concrete the size of basins, wrapped in scalding white steam, flew in all directions like hailstones. The makeshift iron shield we had managed to find was struck head-on by a heavy concrete slab, producing a loud thud and instantly losing more than half its mass. All that remained of the shield was a mangled iron frame, utterly useless for protection. Xiao Chong finally snapped completely. He leaped up from the ground, screaming hysterically, his voice sounding utterly unhinged. shouting and yelling. He grabbed an entire crate of high-explosive grenades from the floor. Ignoring the flying metal shards around him, he clutched the wooden crate and scrambled frantically toward the creature's underbelly. "Come back! Get back here!" The captain yelled at the top of his lungs, reaching out to grab Xiao Chang's clothes, but only catching a torn piece of fabric. Xiao Chang's shirt ripped open under the force, but he didn't look back. He stepped into the scalding mucus, shoved the entire crate of grenades under the creature's swollen belly, pulled the fuse, and then rolled backward several times, crashing into a concrete slab beside my legs. The explosion erupted in an instant. It was an entire crate of high-explosive grenades with unimaginable destructive power. The massive shockwave, mixed with thick smoke, turned everything within a dozen meters pitch black. I felt my body being shoved half a meter backward by an immense force. The ringing in my ears grew louder, and the alloy floor was blasted into a smoking crater. But as the black smoke began to clear slightly, the sight before us left everyone stunned. The creature hadn't moved an inch. Its glossy black shell was now merely coated with a layer of soot. Slowly, it turned its featureless head toward our direction. Its rectangular, vent-like mouth suddenly split open, revealing rows upon rows of densely packed metal pins. It began inhaling deeply, sucking in all the residual scalding hot air and black smoke from the explosion like a vacuum cleaner, drawing every last bit into its wide belly. As it absorbed this thermal energy, its body grew even larger than before, its black shell now emitting an eerie dark red glow. Its weight seemed to have increased significantly, and as its thick, pipe-covered legs pressed down, the alloy floor sank another dozen centimeters. Xiao Chang stared blankly at the scene. His hands trembled violently, and his rifle clattered to the ground. He slumped weakly into the pile of broken concrete, his eyes wide and fixed on the creature, his lips trembling uncontrollably, unable to utter a single word. He began clawing at his own hair with both hands, knocking his helmet askew, and remained motionless. I knew that if we waited any longer, at most 3 minutes, the main compressor would reach its physical limit and trigger a catastrophic explosion. By then, this underground base and everyone in it would be blasted into dust and buried alive. I had no time to think. I reached out with my right hand and gave the captain's shoulder a firm pat. The captain snapped out of it and looked at me. I raised my left hand and pointed to the emergency manual pressure relief valve at the top of the wind tunnel. The valve was positioned 5 meters above the ground, just diagonally above the creature. Nearby was a deformed yellow steel frame, and the valve itself was a large red iron wheel. To reach it, someone would have to climb the precarious steel frame and forcefully press the iron wheel down by hand. Once that pressure relief valve is pulled, all the high-pressure air inside the storage tank will surge out through an emergency side channel. This immense force might blast the monster blocking the nozzle away, giving us a chance to survive. But the valve is dangerously close to the monster's head. Whoever goes to pull it risks being torn apart by the supersonic wind blasting from the side the moment the valve opens, or being crushed into pulp by the monster's single hand. The captain looked in the direction I pointed, then back at me, without a word or hesitation, his face covered in soot and blood, hardened. He reached out and gripped my shoulders firmly. Then, the captain pushed himself up from the ground. He grabbed another fully loaded rifle from the debris, holding the trigger down. The rapid gunfire erupted again. Shouting at the top of his lungs, the captain charged toward the monster's flank, firing relentlessly at its side. The flattened bullets clattered to the ground. He was using his own body and the gunfire to draw the monster's full attention. The moment the captain moved, I did too. I flung the rifle off my back and gripped a collapsed metal frame beside me. My right side throbbed with pain, every movement feeling like bone grinding against flesh. But I ignored it, pushing off a chunk of broken concrete and leaping upward to grab a suspended, warped yellow steel beam. The beam was scorching hot, its paint completely peeled off by the heat. My hands clenched the rough edges, palms sliced open by the jagged metal, blood instantly smearing the yellow paint. Gritting my teeth, I swung my legs and found footing on a horizontal rebar. I began to climb. Debris rained from the ceiling above, white dust clouding my vision. With each upward pull, the warped beam groaned and swayed violently. The monster's attention was indeed captured by the captain's gunfire. A low rumble echoed from its vent-like mouth as its massive body slowly shifted toward the captain. Its tail, a tangled mass of thick, fleshy tubes, swung through the air, smashing the surrounding wrecked equipment to pieces. I mustered all my strength, hauling myself upward hand over hand. My fingers, slick with black oil and red blood, slipped repeatedly, nearly sending me plummeting from several meters up. My eyes remained fixed on the large red pressure relief valve wheel overhead, now less than a meter from my right hand. The roar from the main pipeline had sharpened to a whistle, the steel surface glowing from dull red to bright. Catastrophe loomed overhead. If I delayed by even 2 seconds, everything here would be lost. Just as my right hand touched the large red iron wheel, before I could press down, an overwhelmingly violent gust of wind roared past my ears. The monster had realized my intent. Its massive, black-shelled body twisted abruptly, halting its advance toward the captain. Its hidden tail whipped through the air, a blurred shadow accompanied by a shrieking tear, hurtling straight toward the yellow steel beam where I was pulling the valve. With a thunderous crash, the tail struck like a multi-ton solid iron rod, slamming directly into the lower section of the yellow beam. The 3-centimeter thick reinforced steel pipe instantly dented and snapped under the impact. Sparks and yellow paint fragments sprayed in all directions. The entire suspended beam split in two, the lower half flying off and crashing into the distant alloy floor, leaving a deep crater. With my footing gone, my body plummeted downward. Instinctively, my hands clamped onto the red iron wheel above, leaving me dangling in midair like a pendulum. A sharp crack echoed from my right elbow. An excruciating pain shot from my shoulder throughout my body, making my vision swim. On the ground, my teammates erupted into a frenzy. The team leader's rifle spat a long tongue of flame, bullets crackling as they struck the monster's joints. Xiao Chong, meanwhile, scrambled up from the rubble on the ground, his face blackened with soot. Shouting wildly, he unleashed a torrent of fire from his heavy machine gun at the monster's sweeping tail. The dense barrage of bullets thudded dully against the creature's body. Though they couldn't penetrate its thick black carapace, the sheer impact of dozens of rounds striking the same spot still had an effect. The monster's body jerked violently sideways under the onslaught, and its second massive claw, poised to grab me, slammed instead into the nearby concrete wall. The wall instantly shattered into a gaping hole over 2 meters wide, sending chunks of concrete and sand cascading down, burying half of the monster's arm in the debris. Seizing the opportunity, I braced both feet against the wall and pushed off with all my strength, using the rebound to throw my entire weight onto my hands. Gritting my teeth, I wedged my dislocated right arm into the gap of the iron wheel and summoned every ounce of strength I had, forcing the bright red emergency manual pressure release valve handle downward with a violent thrust. The valve finally bottomed out. The moment the handle locked into place, a deafening roar erupted as the pent-up, high-pressure air surged through the emergency vent at an unimaginable, terrifying speed. The force of the blast was overwhelming. As it erupted, it whipped the surrounding air into a massive, swirling vortex of white vapor. The monster, its head jammed tightly against the intake nozzle, let out a shriek like grinding rusted steel plates as its 3-meter-tall, multi-ton body was violently shoved sideways by the super hurricane force. Under the Mach speed winds, its glossy black shell began emitting thick white smoke across large sections. The blast pried the monster's body away from the nozzle, its thick legs buried deep in the steel plating, scraping 2 long, dark trenches across the alloy floor, sending fragments of metal flying in all directions. But the sideways blast of high-pressure wind also swept up everything in its path that wasn't secured. The reinforced blast-proof glass of the observation room shattered instantly under the pressure, exploding into a shower of crystalline fragments. Carried by the gale, the shards whipped through the corridor like countless tiny, razor-sharp blades. A nearby iron cable rack was torn clean from the wall, spun through the air, and smashed into the control panel, shattering the instruments. The team leader, who had been covering me, was standing closest to the vent. A 3-meter-long, thigh-thick broken steel pipe was caught in the massive airflow. Spinning rapidly through the air like a giant metal club, it struck the team leader squarely in the chest. I heard a dull thud as his body was flung backward like a weightless leaf, flying 4 or 5 meters through the air before crashing heavily into the casing of a bulky generator. The metal shell dented deeply under the impact, and the team leader slid down to the ground, his rifle clattering beside him. He collapsed face down, vomiting a mouthful of blood before losing consciousness. "Team leader," Xiao Chong shouted, crawling desperately against the wind toward him. Meanwhile, the monster, now half-pried from the nozzle, went into a frenzy. Its wind valve-like mouth gaped wide, the metal firing pins inside sparking white from rapid collisions. It stretched out its arms, thick with coarse tubing, and seized a nearby support column that was shaking violently. With a brutal wrench, its 5 steel hook-like fingers dug deep into the concrete. As the tubes along its arms writhed, the meter-thick support column was torn apart by sheer brute force. The ceiling of the underground lab began collapsing in large sections. Slabs of concrete, each weighing hundreds of pounds, crashed to the floor, shattering the alloy plating into pieces. A cloud of white dust and scalding steam blotted out all visibility. Hanging from the iron wheel, my hands were nearly numb. After releasing most of its pressure, the main compressor finally emitted a groan like a dying dog, its rotation speed plummeting. The bone-shattering wind that had raged for over 10 seconds gradually began to subside. The monster that had snapped the pillar, its body having endured the high-temperature, high-pressure airflow from the pressure relief valve, now had large patches of its originally black, glossy hard shell turned ash gray. Those gray shells were covered in fine cracks, with shimmering silver liquid continuously dripping from the fissures, sizzling as it hit the ground. Its massive body swayed twice before. Deprived of the energy from the high-pressure airflow, it collapsed with a heavy thud, half kneeling in the center of the ruins and leaving a deep crater in the ground. All around, white steam hissed from broken pipes, filling the air with a constant, sharp sound. My hands went slack, and I plummeted from several meters in the air, crashing heavily onto a pile of tattered insulation material. The frenzied jets of white steam gradually subsided, replaced by the clattering sounds of metal pipes falling everywhere. Using my left hand to push against the sandy ground, I pulled myself out of the heap of ruined insulation. My right arm was completely useless now, hanging limp beneath my shoulder, every movement sending a sharp, tearing pain through the flesh around the joint. Xiao Chong was kneeling not far away, gripping the captain's tactical vest with both hands, dragging him toward the emergency elevator. The captain's eyes were still closed, the bulletproof plate on his chest deeply dented, and dried streaks of dark red blood caked around his lips. Lao Du, meanwhile, was using his hands to push off the ground, propelling himself with his intact left leg while dragging his right leg, flattened by the control cabinet, exposing white, shattered bone, leaving a long, dark red trail behind. Gritting my teeth, I staggered over and grabbed the captain's belt with my only functional left hand, helping Xiao Chong pull him, stumbling and crawling, toward the iron door of the emergency exit. Just before we retreated into the elevator, I glanced back toward the center of the wind tunnel lab. The massive monster wasn't dead. Its towering, 3-meter-tall body still lay in the ruins of the shattered air intake. The ash-gray sections of its hard shell were slowly peeling outward, one by one. As the shells opened, the heavy machine gun bullets that had struck it earlier, now flattened into iron discs, were being squeezed out from the gaps between its plates. The discs clattered onto the waterlogged alloy floor, producing sharp, metallic clinks. The rectangular, horizontal slit on its face, resembling a wind gate, still quivered slightly. Inside, rows of gear-shaped metal strikers ground against each other with agonizing slowness, emitting a sound like the ticking of an old clock with a jammed spring. Its two thick, pipe-covered legs retracted slightly, crushing a nearby half-slab of concrete into dust once more. At that moment, the elevator's iron door slammed shut with a heavy, resounding thud.